Welcome, everyone, and thank you for listening in. We're really excited to bring this kind of podcast, Zoom meeting, technological event to you to have a conversation with some experienced individuals who have gone through the hiring process, the training process, the interviewing process, posting, all of the steps that you take when you're acclimating and having a new individual join your organization. And we know at this point that we are in a position where we're hiring individuals for advocate positions, counseling positions, therapist positions, and SART coordinators. And we're hoping that as you begin to expand your work in sexual assault services, that we can talk about these processes within that context. The panelists include Carla Blinkhorn, Jan Mancinelli, Debbie Feldersmith, and I'll be asking them questions and they will share some information with you. We do understand and value the importance of inclusion and diversity. Our goal was to get something out to you very quickly, and so based on schedules and things like that, we are able to do something today that you'll have a chance to be able to listen to. But unfortunately, we're not going to be able to go into that in too much depth. But we do want to encourage you as you are going through the hiring process to be thinking about how are you including individuals from your community that may not look the same as you or come from the same kind of experience that you've had, and that you're expanding your horizons in that arena. So let's start with Debbie. Debbie, can you tell us about your experience hiring for newly created positions? And how you might support them. So what kinds of things are you looking at when you're looking at quality services, excellence in service, and it's a new position? Where are you going to post the position? What kinds of procedures are you going to follow around hiring? Who's involved in the interview process? What steps might you take to expand the where the posting is going? Things like that.
Sure. Thanks, Karen. Well, I think in my experience, I have been, and my staff have been the most successful when we were really thoughtful and intentional and structured about the process, that we took the time to think about the process before we just jumped in. And what I mean by that, we were successful in getting really good candidates when I wasn't being a lone wolf out there making all the hiring decisions, or when I was setting up another staff person to maybe, be a lone wolf and make those decisions on their own. So the first thing that, if you're going to take the time, and I encourage you to do it because it's very, very much valuable, is spend time figuring out who you want to hire. What role is this position going to play in your organization? What department are they going to be in? Who are they going to report to? What kind of diversity do you need on your staff if you're looking for that? And if you do that, then that leads you right into deciding whether you're going to post internally for a position, or if you're going to go outside externally and post, or both. There's a lot of great reasons to hire internally. First of all, is it's an opportunity for you to invest in your staff and their career. And in our field, there's not a lot of movements and transitions available oftentimes. Those candidates are already committed to your organization. They're committed to your mission. They know you. What you see is what you get. You already know up front. You're not basing everything on one interview, and it really saves the organization time and money. But you might decide that, okay, you're going to post internally, but you want to post externally too, particularly if it's related to, you want to expand your staff and diversity. So we would, do all the traditional mechanisms for posting, newspapers, any kind of post, our relationships with universities, social work departments, psychology departments, intern departments. But we would also take it to diverse communities. So if we were looking to expand the diversity on our staff, and we really wanted someone who might have that background, we would take it to diverse communities, diverse constituencies, even have your staff explore that. They're involved in a lot of different groups, and they can take the posting, to marginalized groups or, LGBTQ, whatever you happen to be looking for. It really gets it out there. And then asking for referrals from a variety of sources, all the networks that you're in, any, minority employer might have people that might be good for your agency. Of course, the online stuff, the Indeed, and the Glassdoor, and really encourage staff to take that out there, not just yourself. And the most important thing I thought was being open. One of the best hires that I ever got was a woman. I was pumping gas, and she came up to me and saw my bumper sticker and said, "Oh, I like your bumper sticker." And we got to talking, and she said, I just sent you a resume. And I liked her so much from that. I went back, pulled the resume, and she was one of the best people I've ever hired. So you got to I learned from that to be open to finding a candidate anywhere. So after you post, then you also, we learned was to spend time deciding how we were going to evaluate the candidate, what we were going to be looking at, what skills we were looking for, what qualifications, what personality traits. If this is somebody that's got to go out in the community and work with people, there's a certain type of personality that you want to be able to do that. And then the last thing that we needed to spend time on was planning out the interview process. Who in your organization is going to do the screening? Who's going to get all those applications and resumes and sort through them and, make the pile of ones that just aren't appropriate for you? Who's going to do the phone screening? I've spent lots of time, on looking at resumes, thinking somebody's a really good candidate. I have a phone conversation with them, and we don't click. There's something about the agency, the pay scale, whatever it is, and it would be a waste of their time and my time to bring them in. And then the other thing is who's deciding who was going to be on the interview team for this particular position. And I liked it. We were best when we mixed it up, from people with all levels of the organization to be involved in the interview team. Because that brings a lot of different diversity to the questions they ask. Different people see different things in candidates. And then we would have a final interview with either the executive director or the supervisor of that particular department. So that kind of gets you to the interview process.
Great. Could you tell us a little bit about when you were hiring somebody who might have been working in the domestic violence portion of your agency, and now you're looking at them, or they would like to move into the sexual assault? Are there different kinds of things that you would look at or think about? I know you mentioned already looking internally, because those are individuals that you know and that understand the work that you're doing and understand the culture of your organization. But maybe there's some things that you might look at a little bit differently when they're switching programs.
Sure. Yeah. Yes, that came out in my experience too. You all know, if you're working in the field of domestic and sexual violence, that they're different. It's different. So Carla and Jan are going to talk more about questions that you're going to ask any candidate who are applying for these positions. But so I'm going to focus kind of on the people who might be in your agency working for domestic violence and want to switch to taking on a position in sexual assault. So what I would do is really focus on the sexual assault and the transition. So maybe asking them, why are they interested in making the switch from domestic violence to sexual assault? What do they think they can bring to making that transition, to being a quality, successful counselor, whatever the position is in sexual assault? And then I think I would really want them to tell me what they see as the difference between domestic violence and sexual assault, and working with those survivors to really know where they're coming from. And I'd want to know what concerns they have about making the transition, what needs they may have, and how the organization can help them be successful. And those are kind of the basic things of really focusing on the sexual assault, the transition, in addition to all the other questions that you would do in an interview. And I would kind of really relay the expectations that I had for the role. The role around the general position, that it's a sexual assault position, and the focus is on sexual assault, and their experience was TV, and what I would want from that position. And I would tell them that I wouldn't expect them to know everything about sexual assault, but I would expect them to ask questions, be open to communication, training, mentorship, and just really being open to that, and for asking for what they need, even if they don't know what they need, because sometimes when you change focus like that, you just don't know, and letting them know that it's okay to ask questions like that. So I would kind of build on the relationship I have with the person, because they've already been with the agency, they know you know them. They're connected to the mission. They know what you're trying to accomplish with your sexual assault vision. And so you could tell them that that role that they're being considered for is a vital role in this whole vision. And that's why you're really, pushing that so much.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jan, could you talk a little bit about what the interview process might look like when you are hiring from outside of the organization? Maybe some of the general questions you might ask, or the sorts of things that you might look at so that you could express and explain what it is like to work in your organization, so that somebody might understand what they're coming into, especially in these kinds of roles that we're talking about. We're talking about advocates, counselors, therapists, and SART coordinators. Those are all very different kinds of roles, but an individual might be coming into your organization, especially if they're a therapist or a counselor, from a more from a healthcare or a different kind of human service agency, and it's important for them to understand what it might be like to work in a sexual assault service agency. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I think one of the most responsible points in hiring someone during my time with the agency was I always felt such a responsibility towards choosing a person that could really, really work with a person, knowing that the trauma that they experienced was probably one of the most defining points in their lives, and how important it was important for me to really try to find a candidate that had a lot of empathy, that really understood a lot of the issues around trauma and the culture and the rape culture and victim blaming and all of the things that would have impact how a relationship, a therapeutic or helping relationship would grow. So I always wanted to find out if they had some deeper understanding of some of those issues, particularly around victim blaming, how our culture, how our, police, the systems that they deal with, that a victim has had to deal with, would face, what they're going to face in the community, and probably the messaging they've received over years, having been a survivor of sexual assault. So I was always looking for particularly the empathy and the understanding of what some of those critical issues might be. One of the issues I always wanted to know about and deal with was to really test out, or as much as you can test out, but get a really good idea of what that person's definition of boundaries were, not only for themselves, but for the client. And because a lot of times when a person has been traumatized, the issues of boundaries sometimes go beyond what you might see in another kind of client coming in for another issue. So I really wanted to know and assess people's understanding of what a boundary is, and where they draw the line for that, and where they would draw that line or help draw that line to help the client understand what was going on. Trauma is a very important part of working with a client, not only because they have to understand the trauma this person has faced, but then the trauma that they get from having to hear this day in and day out with clients, and some of the horrible things that go on in the kind of sexual assault that faces so many of the clients that we see. So I want to know how well that person has an idea about their own self-care. And I always felt like I'm looking for the healthiest person I can find to try and work with the people that are facing this many times for the first time in their lives. They may have been a victim 20 years ago and never ever talked about it. So what are the kinds of issues that are going to come out during that process, and what that client's going to face? How are you going to deal with that, and how are you going to help the client deal with that?
Dan, what happens? You were the executive director in a very rural area. What happens when you don't have a viable candidate? What kinds of things do you do?
Well, many times I learned the hard way. I think the best thing after many years of doing some bad hires was really determining that the best thing to do was not hire. That it was better to try to look at different areas where you might be able to find a candidate, keep that position open, work with your analysts to let them know that, it's not like you're just sitting on your haunches waiting for somebody to walk through to use the money up. We want to have the right person in these jobs because they're so critical for the people that we're trying to serve. So overall, it was just better to leave that position open and then keep trying through many different avenues to try and attract a candidate.
So what kinds of things did you do to manage the grant process or the contract process? Did you talk to your analysts? What kinds of things? Look at your budget?
Well, the budgetary stuff was always very important, and that's the kind of thing that you would work with your analyst for. Re-advertise the position, look to if, depending on when the time fell, if there were people graduating, if it was near graduation at universities or grad schools. I knew a couple people that did placed interns from like Michigan State and whatever. Sometimes I would give them a call to see if they had any really good candidates that they might want to send our way. I would just try and overturn every stone I could to try to reach out further than what we had already done. And oftentimes that was very expensive because of the advertising in newspapers and because we were going to the bigger markets, Grand Rapids, Detroit, Lansing, Ann Arbor, because up here in a rural area, you don't have a big reach.
Okay, great. And you talked a lot about the boundaries and looking for the person who is the right fit, things like that. But I'm also wondering how you would describe your organizational structure, or how you did describe your organizational structure to individuals.
Well, we were a multi-purpose service agency, so we did lots of things. The biggest part of what we did were the direct services to individuals who were survivors of domestic abuse and sexual assault. We also had a very large kind of general counseling load. So we had a large agency with a lot of services. But this service for sexual assault was, to me, always something that was, it was at the heart of what we were doing as a women's center, because for so long, no one had ever dealt with this issue. The bulk of our caseload were really adult survivors of child sexual assault. So for many of them, it was very difficult for them to step forward and come for help. So within our agency, we were always trying to be very sensitive to that. Not only the staff that were going to be seeing these individuals, but also the frontline staff at the secretaries and the receptionist people. we also were an agency that really believed very strongly in supervision and the need to participate in supervision. So we had certain expectations that I would always want to relay to that candidate, that we didn't expect them to be an 8 to 5 person, that they were going to be part of a bigger team, and that team really strove to work together and to be open and honest in all of our dealings, that we were an agency that, because we are in a small community, that we were an agency that always had to be better. Because as a woman's organization, oftentimes we were looked at as the people causing trouble. And because we were bucking always the status quo in for equality and justice for women, that sometimes did not go over well. So was a person going to be comfortable in that kind of an agency where we're not just doing what, you know, the culture, the society thinks we should be doing? Because oftentimes we are questioning the old ways that have been done, particularly when it came to dealing with survivors of sexual assault. And it wasn't going to be about the way she was dressed. And we were, you know, if something came out like that, we always confronted those kinds of things in our community.
Thank you. Wonderful. Carla, let's switch over to some of the things that we've already been talking about. What kinds of additional questions might you ask, or things that you might share with a candidate about their readiness to work in this field?
Well, I think whenever you're talking about working with survivors of trauma, it's important to understand the personal history of the candidate, whether that is their own experience with trauma or the experience of other family members or friends with trauma. So, you know, we can ask some very basic questions like, do you have any personal experience that's important that might impact the work that you do with sexual assault survivors? It's important also to help them understand that working with sexual assault survivors does have plays a role in your personal life and has an impact on your personal life and perhaps how you perceive the world as a safe or not a safe place. When the YWCA started being involved with sexual assault survivors, the very first person that we worked with was a person who had a son my age, who was my age, and who was sexually assaulted at home. I freaked out. I went around locking all the doors 6 times and checking the windows. And, you know, the more that I realized how many sexual assault survivors were me, just in a different setting, it impacted the way that I saw the world. If you're working with children who are sexually assaulted, it can clearly impact your sense of safety for them. So you really have to pay attention to the impact on you personally, the impact in your family, and how do you process those issues. In our organization, supervision was very important, and that was a place where somebody could talk about the impact, not just, you know, how's the client doing, but how's the staff person doing in working with traumatized clients, and making sure that the candidates know that they will be free to be able to talk in supervision about the impact of their work. I think the other thing, and this is particularly true with master's level staff, and you referenced it a little earlier before, Karen, is that this is sexual assault work. This is not a clinical mental health program. And while there are certainly elements of mental health in your work, it's also important to know that you very well may be doing things that are not typical from your academic background or your employment background. So with sexual assault survivors, you may be more engaged with advocacy, you may be more engaged in helping them find referrals, you may be helping them through the process of testimony and what impact that has on them. You may be working with other family members. So I think making sure that they understand what it is to work with sexual assault, that they're really clear that their own history can impact positively outcomes for sexual assault survivors. I think, you know, we just have to have that frank discussion, whether you're talking about somebody who's a SART coordinator or somebody who's working directly with survivors.
And that leads us to, what kinds of things would you be thinking about as you were training someone and bringing them onto your staff?
I think it's really important. Yeah, I think it's really important with people who are working with sexual assault survivors that they receive specific training in working with sexual assault. So in new service provider training, it's very possible that you start out with all staff together and talking about the history of domestic violence and sexual assault and other related issues. But sexual assault survivors have to have their own training. They really need to understand the neurobiology of trauma, rape trauma syndrome. They need to understand the intersection of sexual assault and racism, and how to work potentially with LGBTQ survivors. So role plays, education, that aspect of training needs to be very specific to sexual assault. It may seem, particularly for smaller organizations, that it's hard to think about. You just have one or two new staff who are working in sexual assault, and it may, trying to figure out how to train them specifically may be challenging. So I'd really encourage people to look around the state at other organizations. For example, the YWCA had 40 hours of training for sexual assault advocates and staff, and often other agencies participated in that training. So it's not necessarily the response. Your only option is what you can offer as an organization, but to also look at what's available through other organizations.
Great, that's very helpful. As you think about the training and the person that you're bringing on and all of those different pieces, one of the things that I always would talk about and that I would recognize is that it takes a while to build a caseload. It's not something that you walk right in usually and you all of a sudden have enough people that you're working with. So what kinds of strategies and ideas and ways would you help somebody during that time frame when they're, and even sometimes after you've been there a while, the caseload will ebb and flow, and it'll be more intense at some times than it is at others.
Yeah, I don't think it's at all unusual, especially for a program that is relatively new in working in sexual assault, to not have a strong caseload to begin with, and there certainly are some lag periods. So it's important to look at who you have been serving and who you traditionally serve, and then really look carefully at the experience of sexual assault survivors. There are many people who are very underserved in sexual assault. That includes people who are developmentally disabled, people who are homeless, people with a variety of different disabilities. Veterans are sexually assaulted while in the military and are more vulnerable when they leave the military. There are seniors in residential environments, people that are LGBTQ. There are a lot of different populations that are at risk, but are maybe not necessarily seen by the organization. So who's out there that you haven't been seeing? What organizations are available in the community to provide services to those populations? Make sure that you're connected with the populations. But also, it's really important if you're going to make a commitment that you're going to, for example, work with people with developmental disabilities, it's really important that you make sure you're trained to work with that person, or that you have a connection with an organization to help you in working with that person. So definitely go out and look and see who you're not serving, make sure you make the connections in the community, and then also make sure that you train yourself. That you receive training. I know that the division is going to offer a lot of different trainings for staff in the state, throughout the state, and there are a lot of opportunities and webinars and other trainings through national resources for specific targeted populations. I think you also need to look at making sure that you're as accessible as possible to survivors. So if you're waiting in your office, obviously, you want to go out and market the program, but you also want to go out and check to see if there are other places or other ways to create interventions with survivors other than having them come to you. So, looking at schools, looking at faith communities, certainly looking at Skype, at FaceTime, looking at the hours that you offer services, really evaluating, are you as available as possible in as many different ways as possible to survivors. obviously, when you're looking at any of those issues, confidentiality is huge, and making sure that you're setting up your systems in a way that survivors are always safe and their interaction is always a confidential interaction.
Great. And that also reminds us that in the process of posting, interviewing, hiring, we also want to make sure that we are addressing the accommodation needs that individuals might have. We only have a couple more minutes left, and so I just wanted to ask if there's anything more that anybody would like to add, any other additional insights that you might have at this point?
I think going back to Debbie's point about connecting with diverse communities, and I know this is very true in the Grand Rapids area, but there are a lot of African American and Latina sororities that are out there, that making sure that you connect with them, making sure people are on your board, that way before you're actually interviewing with people, you have those connections so that they really want to partner with you in getting the right people to your organization.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Well, it's hard work, but it is extremely rewarding work.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you for joining us. And please know that if you have additional questions or comments, or if you would like to reach out to Debbie, Jan, or Carla, they are available if you'd like to talk about any specifics. But we just wanted to raise your awareness around some of and help you to think through some of the things that you might be facing as you are greatly expanding. We're very excited about the projects that are coming up across the state and the level of services that are going to be provided, both the depth and the breadth of the work. And we think that this is an especially exciting time for us as we go forward, and we hope that this has helped in that process. Thank you.